Howdy, folks. This is Seeds, the podcast. I'm here with Alia Yarrow, and I am Hayden Shaw. And we're going to be talking about a theory that we've recently sort of began to develop after hearing some really interesting information. And really this stems from an idea that, or a question I think a lot of us share, in particular Alia and I talk about a lot, and that is this question of how we got here and why things are such a mess in regards to environmental degradation, separation, this sort of capitalistic, imperialistic mindset that's really degrading the fabric of life in so many ways. And so it's been a question that I've been sitting on for quite a long time, and Alia has herself. And after listening to some different ideas in regards to some historical narratives and where we come from, some questions began to arise around sort of generational trauma, and maybe we experienced collectively an event that was incredibly traumatic and sort of reshaped our relationship to the earth itself and to others that might be continuing to perpetuate itself in sort of how we see society acting out today. So that's sort of like a framework, and we'll get into some of the details about it, but I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Alia.
Yeah, thank you, Aiden. I think that some of this comes from, as you mentioned, this idea of, is there something inherent to individual humans? Is there something inherent to the species at large that's maybe what we could think of as an infection that is leading to this place that we're at now of such separation from different parts of ourselves, from the earth, from each other? Or is there actually the possibility that there's been an external experience that our species is still healing from and may not really have the capacity to fully heal from unless we can help shine some light on the possibility of this historical occurrence that isn't often talked about.
Right. And we certainly see a lot of different explanations of what we see being manifested in the world today. Like, certainly our different religions give their interpretations of why certain things are certain ways of being are being acted upon in this society, through the Christian lens. They call it sin, and sort of this fall of man and this fall out of the Garden of Eden as sort of the spiritual occurrence that took place where we sort of accepted this fruit, or this knowledge of good and evil, and sort of descended into sort of the chaotic mess that we see today that's continuing to enact itself. And then from the other side, from the sort of scientific perspective, we see this sort of progress narrative being enacted, which I think is really deceptive in a lot of ways and not really shedding light on the severity of the issues that we're facing and sort of our conception of reality and our blind spots and how we sort of view the world and everything around us and how we engage with it. And sort of we are the furthest and most advanced we've ever been, and it's sort of about integrating this technology and figuring out how to live in balance now, but that this sort of way of being was sort of arose out of necessity, out of progress. And that one didn't really sit with me either. And I think where the question stemmed from of sort of how we got here really came from when I started to look at indigenous cultures and sort of deep history, and the fact that, as in this current form, as Homo sapiens, we've been walking this planet for now 300,000 years. That's the most modern update. Just a few years ago, it was 150,000 years that they thought we had been walking in this modern form, but that's now been doubled. So we've been here for a long time in this modern form with the same cognitive abilities we see now, looking very similar to where we are now. And what we see is that peoples around the world figured out a way to live in in a relatively symbiotic relationship with their environment with really deep spiritual practices to sort of heal traumas and have an understanding of the world around them and how to relate to each other that seem to be very balanced. And obviously we don't want to shine a particular light on cultures of the past and just assume that they are better than they are now. But we do have a lot of examples of current existing hunter-gatherer communities and sort of untouched indigenous cultures that don't show the same symptoms that we're expressing collectively. So my question is, how the hell did we suddenly forget a way of living that seemed to be like really healthy in all ways, from just a happiness perspective, from a physical, biological health, and a spiritually integrated way of being? Like, how did we somehow forget and start moving down this path of like ultra consumption and overproductivity and this sort of imperialistic mindset of imposing certain ideologies on other cultures or other people and sort of enslaving them around the world? Like, what caused that? And that's been a deep area of analysis for me. And I don't know if we should just go right into what we're...
Yeah, well, one thing that I was thinking about too when I heard you say that was like a theory that I guess I've come across in different ways of thinking about this agricultural revolution as being sort of this turning point from hunter-gatherer society to infrastructure in terms of agriculture, where there could be the accumulation of wealth and sort of this narrative. It's almost an inevitability narrative of, with the ability to accumulate wealth, then sort of inherently from that came some of the hierarchical social structures that we see replicating today, as well as some of this hoarding of resource, exploitation of others, exploiting the land, not being in right relationship. And I think both of us feel like that theory feels a little flimsy or not as thick. It feels a little thin in terms of, is that really, can we just rest in the fact that that itself, a new kind of technology, if we're going to think of agriculture as technology, is itself kind of to explain this larger phenomenon, or moving away from some of the longer term ways of being that were the majority of our 300,000 years as a species? Or could there also be other possibilities or variables at play?
Right, and it's sort of been titled the Neolithic Revolution, as if it was some sort of like massively important advancement for the human species, and that these are like sort of minor side effects of something that was really important for us to develop, and the fact that it's sort of been like touted as something that we willingly walk towards, but really when you see the historical evidence, almost every group of individuals that sort of was confronted with this idea resisted it, and it was imposed upon them, and often they were enslaved through the use of militaristic force and certain religious influences to coerce them or physically enslave them into sort of being the farmers and manufacturing the crops for the advancement of this particular culture. But it wasn't something that many people or many cultures actually wanted to move towards. It was something that they actively resisted. So, it's just sitting with that question of where did this come from? I've looked at it from spiritual perspectives and different physical perspectives, but I really think that some of the evidence that's coming to light, what we've titled the cataclysmic trauma theory, there's a lot of geological evidence now, really new science coming out from many very highly accredited scientists, geologists, and archaeologists that are pointing to a particularly massive cataclysmic event that took place 12,800 years ago that sort of plunged the Earth into this period of time that they call the Younger Dryas, which is this massive cooling event that lasted for about 1,000 years, a little over 1,000 years, and then suddenly a massive warming event. And what they're showing is that potentially a large comet struck, actually 4 fragments of a large comet struck the polar ice caps of North America. So 2 apparently hit the polar ice caps of North America. 1 hit over Europe, and then 1 hit as far as Syria, which would have caused global cataclysmic, or global catastrophe at a scale that we could hardly imagine. We're talking like mile-high waves of water, massive global flooding. We're talking huge global earthquakes, massive platonic shifting that would have lasted weeks or months. We're talking clouds of debris that would have covered the entire sky of the planet for hundreds of years, plunging us into an incredibly cold time, an inhospitable time, and would have dramatically changed the entire landscape of almost every corner of the globe. So what Ollie and I have been discussing is, if this took place, what sort of trauma would have deeply embedded itself in the human psyche, and even potentially within our DNA itself, to sort of shift our mindset of everything we thought we knew. All of our spiritual stories that were telling us a way of being, of interconnection and belonging, that the earth cares for us as a mother, all these things, and suddenly we have to live in caves in freezing, temperatures with very little ability to collect or harvest food, massive die-offs in population, probably infighting amongst communities, scarcity definitely, amongst different hunter-gatherer tribes. Like, what would that have done? And Ollie has done a lot of trauma work, done a lot of healing justice work, so I'd like her to speak towards that idea, or just elaborate a little bit on what I've discussed here, what we've uncovered in regards to this cataclysmic event possibility.
Yeah, so with what we know more now, and every year more so, in terms of some of the brain imagery that we can do now, in terms of the effect of trauma on the brain and the ways that trauma is held in the body, we know that it actually alters one's ability to utilize the prefrontal cortex, especially, which is sort of what we think of as the human's capacity to have higher levels of cognitive functioning. And so we know that it would have an effect on that aspect of the body. We also know that the way that the body holds trauma can often be, especially if there's not consciousness brought to that, it can live and be stored in the body in ways that can show up in physiological problems. It can show up in what we would think of as mental health issues. It can show up interpersonally in terms of trust and relationship building amongst community members, amongst family. So it feels really important, with some of what we know around trauma now, to think about what the impact could have been collectively for our species to live through a period of that could have lasted up to 1,000 years of living in a reality of such kind of precarious, unstable conditions, not feeling held by the earth, not trusting the next day to be able to see the sun rise in the way that had previously been known, to not being able to kind of draw upon some of the oral traditions, oral stories, meaning making, that had previously held communities together, and that supported kind of a sense of how one could rest or have a secure attachment, if we're going to think about attachment theory, with the earth and with each other.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And a way I kind of interpret trauma, and correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, but what we see, with different indigenous cultures is that it's not that they don't face traumatic events. Certainly, like, they can see their mother be killed by a tiger, or different traumatic events that, we face different traumas, and they certainly face traumas, but really it's not the event that occurs, but how you actually interpret that event. And if you have like stories or spiritual understandings of death, or, of the fact that like a tiger came and ate your mom, but the tiger's this like really powerful spirit of the jungle or whatever, and it may be like an honor for this person to have been like consumed by that, and they have a deep spiritual understanding of this particular occurrence that they can help integrate what happened and have a relationship to that person after their death, or whatever the story may be. But it's our stories, our way of integrating, that allow us to heal those traumas. And if, as a society, your entire landscape, and we know that their spiritual practices and pretty much everything they believe and how they act is deeply, ingrained in their landscape and in their environment. If their landscape is suddenly completely different, all of their spiritual understanding and their stories that have supported them to deal with trauma suddenly lead them to this event where they have no previous understanding of something that may have taken place like this before. So your entire paradigm, your understanding of your elders or your ancestors guiding you and protecting you, your understanding of the Mother Earth or the Father Sun, which is now blocked out by a dark cloud. You can't even see your Father Sun anymore. Those types of concepts that helped them and held them in this life experience are suddenly gone. And you have to live in that environment for up to 1,000 years in relative, impoverished situation. Certainly, to me, it feels like a really logical jump to say that once they came out of this situation, so let me backtrack a little bit and just say that I don't think we suddenly just stumbled upon agriculture, the ability to plant seeds in the ground, and then it just exploded into what we have now. We certainly see certain indigenous communities around the world that are uncontacted by our civilization, our Western way of doing things, that utilize different forms of agriculture that are more integrated in the natural environment. They are manipulating landscapes. They are promoting certain species of plants to grow more abundantly. So I think we had an understanding of how to plant seeds and how that process works. We just didn't feel the need to store food, because food was in abundance all around us. The landscape just provided that. But we walk out of these caves after spending 1,000 years in relatively impoverished situation with hospitable climate, suddenly to this massive rise in climate temperature, which we see through the geological record, undisputed. Massive rise, sort of this spring, this global spring that takes place where life starts to flourish again around you. But you just experienced for 1,000 years, really harsh conditions. You go out and you immediately start planting in large quantities. You figure out ways to store that, or you try to maximize storage capacity. You see other tribes as potential threat to your existence. If this were to take place again, something like this were to take place again, they would be a threat to your food supply. And sort of this hospitable, competitive environment starts to flourish out of this particular trauma. And in the place, where we see the Neolithic Revolution, maybe this was a place that it was particularly harsh, or they didn't really create integrated stories once they came out of the caves, or however they survived, and it's sort of been perpetuating itself from that particular time.
Mm-hmm. I feel like this possibility of a more complex understanding of what our species may have experienced, what our species did experience, but some of the impacts that it may have, makes so much more sense to me when I think about this idea of the Neolithic Revolution, and why, from a place of many of these world cultures resisting a complete trend towards agriculture, to, after this cataclysmic event, moving more towards that technology, from a place of wanting to, in some ways, control the environment, the landscapes around oneself, and really having a deep sense of fear and scarcity, knowing that at any time something as precarious could happen again. Which, in my mind, thinking about some of the ways that oppression takes form, and kind of the role of hierarchy across identity, of sort of dehumanizing certain people, or not allowing access to certain rights or privileges within a society, it makes so much sense to me that there is a deep place of fear. You really don't need to keep other people lower class citizens or less than human, unless there's a deep wounding and fear and lived experience in your body and in your psychology and an intergenerational knowing that you can't fully trust that there is true abundance, that there is enough for everyone. I feel like that speaks so much to why there may be a rise in more oppressive practices following this known event.
Yeah, it's a known event, and it's relatively recent, when we look at deep history and the fact that we've, in human form, in the modern Homo sapien form, been around for 300,000 years, that we came out of this only, 11,600 years ago is, incredibly recent. And through, this living maybe, epigenetically through us, or just the stories we've enacted and told, and, the culture that was sort of born out of that is perpetuating this trauma. And it makes a lot of sense to me, in regards to this particular, scarcity mindset that we see enacted, throughout society, that something like this would have had a massive effect and could be still perpetuating itself and living out. And it's sort of this sense, and I've had this felt, and I think a lot of people have had this felt sense of feeling sort of separate from, or feeling sort of threatened by the world at large, having this deep seated anxiety, that's sort of feeling unsafe. And I think that a lot of that's manifested through our modern culture, but maybe the root of that is coming from this particular event. And maybe other cultures had a way, or found a way, to integrate, maybe had a moment of taking a breath and realizing, okay, the sun is back. Abundance is back. We are protected again, and maybe their stories were held through this particular time frame in a more holistic way. And I think we can certainly see that through different Native American practices, that certainly have. And the other thing I want to mention is that there is a lot of written and oral tradition around this event. I mean, we see this through indigenous cultures on every continent, talking about massive flooding, talking about a star falling from the sky, talking about fires and earthquakes, and a period of time that was incredibly dark. But some cultures have a shining light at the end of that story about this reemergence, this rebirth, this new opportunity to live in a more connected, holistic way, where maybe this culture in Mesopotamia didn't have that for whatever reason, and it's spread from there to where we are now. And really, I think so the question I have for you now is, how do we deal with this? If it's about getting to this level of feeling unsafe in our environment, that at any moment a comet could fall from the sky, because that's still very possible. And I feel like that lives within us if we've experienced this, collectively, that at any moment a comet could fall from the sky and really change everything overnight. How do we deal with this? How do we heal this? How do we move forward in a way that's integrated and sort of starts telling new stories and new ways of being?
Right. Well, one practice that comes to mind when you ask that question, which is one that I know both of us have experienced directly, is the power of earth-based rites of passage. So both of us having had the experience to be a part of a vision fast, which is very earth-centered, and spending in the middle of that 2-week experience 4 days and nights alone in the wilderness, fasting with just drinking water. And I know for me, one aspect of that was most transformative were moments and times, hours, afternoons, where I was able to just lie on the land and allow myself to really sink in and feel held, feel cared for, feel the earth's ability to hold all the complexity of my emotion, my physical discomfort, my hunger, my limiting thought constructs, to allow myself to really feel held by this mother, by this source of all life in a way that felt deeply healing, and is a continual practice to engage with returning from the vision fast, but one that feels like it's a remembering in a lot of ways of like a more ancient way of knowing and being in relationship with the earth, which makes sense if the majority of our species history from 300,000 years until we're talking about just like 12,800 years ago was a time of more right relationship, more abundance with the earth. It feels like it's a sinking into a deeper, more ancient, primal way of trusting the earth to care for and hold me and to hold all of us. So I found that to be like one particular practice that has felt really restorative and healing and reparative for my relationship to the earth. And through that, because all things and all, especially healing and, well, all things, but healing and transformation is fractal, meaning like it takes on similar forms across different scales. I've found that like in allowing myself to feel held by the earth, that was also a way where I was holding different aspects of myself that maybe I had rejected or pushed away, like younger parts of myself, wounded child parts of myself. And so it also was a way for me to engage in some really important intra-psychic, soul level kind of healing of these different parts that I could kind of fracture or fragmentize in the same way that so often we feel fractured from our earth or disassociated from the earth. And I think from that place, like the type of relationships that we can build that are really coming from a place of when we're more fully here and trusting our body on the earth, we can see others in a clear way if we're allowing ourselves to feel like we can fully express and we know ourselves enough to be seen.
Right.
And then we can also have space to see others.
Definitely.
Is there anything more about your experience or other kind of needed practices at this time that you've had?
Yeah, I really love what you're saying there about being held and finding trust again. And I think that's incredibly important. And one aspect of my vision fast that really stuck with me too was life as a gift. And I think this is really important if we're still trying to integrate that experience, that maybe we were in a time of relative abundance and interconnection and spiritual exploration and really being totally held and comforted by the earth, and then this event happened. Maybe now the next step of consciousness evolution because of this event is to integrate life as a gift, and that everything is change, and that we're not guaranteed existence here as a species, as individuals, on all scales. You know, like we are offered each moment, and each moment that we are here and breathing is a gift to be experienced. And when we can sink into that uncertainty and have trust in that uncertainty, that while we still have this uncertainty in this moment, we are held and we are taken care of, and we can breathe into that and find comfort and peace in that, we can start like moving through the world more freely, more calmly, more centered in our bodies. And for me, it's been a practice of relaxing my nervous system in so many ways. And, you know, I see this like potential traumatic event sort of passing down this sort of stressed and deeply ingrained anxiety that's living in our nervous systems, that's not allowing us to trust and really sink into our environments. We're just rapidly moving across landscapes, extracting as much resource as we can from them and moving on, instead of being calm, centered in where we are, asking ourselves, how can we bring out more abundance from this landscape? How can we offer ourselves as a gift to it through our observation, not through extraction, but as gift giving to the landscape, so it can give us gifts back, and that we can live in this like balance, you know, that's really mutually beneficial. I think is really important for this time. And it's almost like, you know, we all pretty much know this this law of karma in a lot of ways. Like, I shouldn't say we all know this, but it's a pretty well understood law, you know, that you you get in return what you give. And in a lot of ways too, it's all about like your lens in which you're viewing reality. If you're constantly stressed or irritated or agitated, you're going to find more things that are going to stress you out, irritate you, and agitate you. You're just going to keep getting back what you're putting into the world. And so we're almost creating a like self-fulfilling prophecy by not integrating this potentially like this definitely traumatic event. We're creating another one through human induced climate change, which is actually really threatening our Earth's ability to sustain life. So we didn't wake up to the fact that the Earth is now available and ready and willing to hold us and give us life again. And we've been carrying this threat that's now actually undermining our ability to live and exist here. And so I think we need to like find a way to relax and breathe and sink into the moment, so we stop like moving this trauma and seeing it continue to manifest.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up human-made climate change in relation to this topic, because I'm also sitting here thinking about how there can almost be like a PTSD remembrance of this cataclysmic event in the natural disasters and the escalating chaos of our Earth right now, as we're experiencing the effects of human-made climate change, and just really recognizing what a time of both crisis and opportunity this is.
Right, definitely.
Because through this escalation of kind of unstable, unpredictable, chaotic natural occurrences through climate change, if we haven't, which it seems that we haven't fully integrated this collective trauma of our species, it feels like having these kind of lived and external reflections of that deeply held anxiety that the Earth is not a safe place to be is being reinforced around us through our own kind of contribution to the reality of fossil fuel dependency, exploitative practices, so many practices that contribute to an unwell world. We're actually kind of fulfilling that prophecy that the Earth is not a safe and predictable place to live on and to trust.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, and what I see a lot, and something we talk about a lot, is, sort of the push back against human-made climate change through different activist roles. And like before I get into this, I want to preface that I think all action towards this is necessary, and there are holding practices that we need, but really I think what we're being called to do in this time is find peace, to actually relax and be able to truly connect to the Earth, to listen and find our intuition again about how to move forward. It's our disconnection, I think, that's leading us to this place, and this disconnection through internalized trauma and anxieties and like hyperactivity within our nervous system. And if we can find a way to find peace and relax and find trust and sink into our local environments, connect with our communities, connect with our Earth and our landscape, and truly build relationship with it, I think we can quickly find our way through this. But I also see us fighting human-induced climate change with the same level of aggression and anxiety that produces it, that's producing it. And so I really think the spiritual task of our times is to find peace within the chaos, to find peace even within the uncertainty whether the Earth will actually survive this time, and to take on the responsibility within ourselves to cultivate relationship, to take time to pause and connect with our neighbor, or sit under that tree, or make that permaculture garden in your yard, to really each take on our own responsibility to do our internal healing work and then move that healing work outward into the world.
Yeah, because also the risks of not doing that internal healing work and continuing to replicate some of the same like ways of being in relationship to our Earth and to ourselves, and like the frenetic kind of almost militaristic fight against like climate change feels like, to me, it's not allowing the creation of alternate like models of how to live together on this Earth. If we are kind of still coming from a trauma reaction of replicating what we've known, which is from fear, which there is a lot to be afraid of in these times.
Oh, definitely.
But to have that be the main motivating force, fear and anxiety, feels like it's not tapping into a deeper well of actually beauty and possibility and abundance and interconnection that can help guide us not only to how to address human-made climate change, but also beyond that to be creating the practices in the world, the social structures, the permaculture gardens and farms that actually are going to be the world that we want to live in after, hopefully, human-made climate change is addressed.
Right, yeah. It's like simultaneously we need to be developing the models and the systems that will replace or make obsolete the ones that have manifested these problems on Earth. And if we're just so hyper anxious and fearful of what's coming that we're just fighting against it and not breathing into the opportunities to create on the ground level, we're really missing an opportunity to make truly lasting change. Because, you know, if we were to just dismantle the entire system as it is now, but haven't done any integrated work, haven't built any new systems, we would descend into a lot of chaos at this time. So simultaneously, while we have people that sort of have that archetype and are more inclined to take on this frontline work and resisting or holding practices or activism against this injustice, we need those that are more inclined to do farming or earth-based practices to take up their work, and we need to work in solidarity with each other, creating communities and spaces where we can share this knowledge and help each other heal and grow and breathe into this new opportunity and this great turning that's happening, so we can really start to manifest what we all know is possible here.
I just want to uplift, because I feel like you're doing such a beautiful job referring to some of the work by Joanna Macy, this incredible eco-philosopher, Buddhist elder, who has developed in collaboration with others a body of work called The Work That Reconnects. But Hayden has referred to holding practices and also just was saying that needs to be done in relationship with creating alternate models or alternate structures. And so Joanna Macy would say those are two aspects of this change from an industrial growth society to a life-sustaining society, which is all part of a great turning that we're a part of as a species and as an earth. And the third one is consciousness raising. And so she would say that holding practices, alternative structures, and consciousness raising are all important avenues to be a part of this great turning. And as Hayden was saying, there's not a privileging of one or two over the other. All three are central, and that most people, all people, have some sort of kind of soul or inherent compelling, like a reason to feel pulled towards one or two, sometimes all three, in ways that need to be listened to and respected and uplifted. And it all needs to be done in collaboration amongst those three, because all are necessary, not only to dismantle the current paradigm, but also to help breathe life into the world that is emerging through us.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it looks like we're getting a little long on time here. I kind of want to wrap it up, but just in summary, you know, this is a theory that Ollie and I have been playing with, you know, and I know we're speaking with a lot of like confidence and from a place of like
energy
and excitement. But you know, this event is being backed up with a lot of very conclusive scientific evidence in highly credentialed journals. I highly recommend that you take a look at this. Graham Hancock does a great job in sort of summarizing a lot of these findings and what's taking place. But there's a lot of other resources out there that you can look and see that these cataclysmic events did take place. Massive global shift did happen. And the question I've just been pondering is, you know, this is a relatively recent event, and how is it playing out still, or how could it be playing out still to this day, manifesting a lot of the imbalance that we're seeing in the world, moving through in particular humans, and how can we then integrate that experience and move towards healing collectively. So feel free to dive down that rabbit hole if you would like. There will be more podcasts to come from all sorts of different topics. Let us know what you think about this one, and we'll speak soon.
We sure will. Peace out.